comes from Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires actually had 3 miracles happen there over the course of a couple of years. So it's really 3 miracles in one. At the Church of St. Mary in Buenos Aires, on May 1st, 1992, a Eucharistic minister discovered that some fragments of the Eucharist had been left on the corporal. Following church guidelines on these matters, they were placed in water to dissolve and left in the tabernacle for 3 days. After 3 days, they were checked, and the priest discovered that, amazingly, they had not dissolved. 7 days later, May 8th, the tabernacle was opened, and these fragments had developed a reddish blood-like color. The following Sunday, several drops of blood were discovered on the patens while distributing communion. 2 years later, July 24th, 1994, the Eucharistic minister took the pyx from the tabernacle during a children's mass and found it to be bleeding from one side. On August 18th, 1996, a host accidentally fell to the ground during the distribution of communion. Someone evidently had discarded it, dropped it, and then didn't bother, telling the priest, and they put it in a candlestick holder off to the side of the chapel. A more pious person found it and told the priest, and it was quite dusty, so they put it in water to dissolve instead of consuming it, and left it in the tabernacle to dissolve. Once again, a few days later, it did not dissolve, and instead, it had several blood-like stains, as you can see here, that grew larger each day. There was a doctor in that parish of St. Mary's, and she took a little sample of it and to her lab and had it tested, finding that it had type AB blood. And despite being weeks old, it was still fresh, having white blood cells active. No further scientific investigation was done at that time. The priest of St. Mary Parish recounted all these happenings to the Archbishop of Buenos Aires at that time, Jorge Bergoglio, our current pope. And they decided to wait on an investigation. The church is notoriously slow on these matters. But finally in 1999, a professor, Ricardo Castañón, was tasked with performing a thorough investigation, and the go-ahead was given by none other than Cardinal Ratzinger from the Holy See. So they did quite extensive research. From 1999 until 2005, all of the priests and witnesses were interviewed and questioned. The samples were meticulously studied. They were researched by several scientists, including an expert in forensic medicine and cardiac pathologies, Frederick Zugabe, of New York, Columbia University. The samples were given to him without telling him the source. He had no idea that they were from a Eucharistic miracle. Neither Castañón nor Zugabe were religious, and in fact, Castañón was kind of hoping to prove these matters false, as an academic. Also, they had a team of filmographers track how this investigation was going. Here's another image here of the blood emanating from the host. So what they found, again, that these tissues were from a human heart, male, and that the tissue, despite being years old, had not been kept in any type of preservative, was still found to be living. So the first one they studied, it was already 5 years old by the time they got to it, and it was still living, actively consuming. The white blood cells were doing their job that white blood cells do. Ordinarily, it only takes 15 minutes for white blood cells to die outside of a living body. They also found, based on the proteins in the heart that it came from had a heart attack or something, but it wasn't a heart attack spurred on by congestive heart failure. It was the type of heart attack that you have under extreme duress. So that was very interesting. Dr. Zugabe was very surprised and disappointed when he found out that it came from a miraculous host. He didn't know what to make of it. The next miracle occurred at Tixla, Mexico. Tixla is a small town in Mexico, and on October 21st, 2006, during Mass for a retreat, 2 priests and a nun were distributing Holy Communion. As the nun held a host to give it to a communicant, it suddenly began to effuse this reddish substance like blood. She looked up with tears in her eyes and showed the priests, and they reported the incident to Bishop Alejo Castro. He asked again Dr. Ricardo Castañón, because it was in a similar time frame, to look into this matter as well. A series of investigations were done, and the findings were, in 2013, the reddish substance was human blood, type AB positive. The blood came from inside the host, once again. And the microscopic evidence revealed that it was still fresh, active white blood cells, the protein structures, it all showed the same thing, that it was somebody who died under extreme duress. They also found DNA evidence, but oddly, it was inconclusive. Okay, the last miracle I'm going to tell you about is from Legnica, Poland. And this is a very, very Catholic place. I know that's a little blurry, but I'll tell you the story here first. This occurred at the Church of St. Hyacinth, Christmas Mass, 2013. The Saint Hyacinth that the church is named after, just incidentally, was a medieval saint who, during a Mongol invasion, ran back into the sanctuary, risking his life to save the Eucharist. So it's kind of interesting that this happened here. A consecrated host here fell to the ground during communion. It was placed in a container of water to dissolve, stored in the tabernacle. A few days later, reopened, the host was not dissolved and instead had this blood coming from it. Here's another picture. The portion of the host that had turned to what looked like human flesh was removed and put on this corporal, and the Legnica Department of Forensic Medicine was enlisted to investigate. Again, the researchers found the same thing that they'd kept finding. It was human heart tissue, living AB blood, and it came from someone clearly in the state of trauma, but the DNA evidence, they had DNA. For some reason, the DNA was inconclusive. So you can see that there's a theme to each miracle. It comes from, in each case, there was a moment of doubt or human foible. Someone drops the host is dropped, and then that host, has this miraculous thing happen. All right, I already told you that all of them were the same. Like, basically, you're seeing the same person each time, which is fantastic. The church does not take claims of miracles lightly at all. It doesn't move quickly to address them. It took years for all of these to be approved, because when you are too quick about these things and they're proven false, it causes a scandal, people lose their faith. And as I was investigating these, I saw tons of crazy miracle claims, one of which was an evangelical preacher who was a dentist, was going around changing people's fillings gold, and people believed him, and they lost their faith when it was proven that he was just using dye to color their teeth. So we are very careful in these matters. So I found this really sweet man who interviewed all of these scientists. I wanted to show you. He's just, I just find him to be a very joyful person. And then you can hear firsthand these doctors talk about what they saw when they investigated this host. I hope this works. You can see that I'm not a very good millennial. Okay, here we go.
Said, "This is my body." The bread actually became his body. Over the centuries, Christ has given us a series of Eucharistic miracles, where the bread is transformed into his flesh. The tissues from these Eucharistic miracles have been studied by medical doctors from around the world, and in this video, you will hear from them firsthand and see their medical reports. What we see is that each miracle contains a startling pattern that science has discovered. The patterns are: 1, there is heart tissue. 2, the heart is living. 3, the heart is suffering. 4, the blood is type AB. And 5, DNA tests were all inconclusive. In this video, I'll focus on the 3 best documented Eucharistic miracles: Tixla, Buenos Aires, and Lanciano. We will start with Tixla, Mexico. On October 21st, 2006, Father Raimundo Esteban and sisters were distributing communion during Mass. One sister brought over a ciborium to show Father that a red liquid had begun to come from the host. I spoke with Dr. Eduardo Sanchez Lazo, who personally analyzed the miraculous tissue. Using electron microscopy, he discovered the most amazing aspect I've ever heard for a Eucharistic miracle: that the blood came from inside the host. And the blood then covered the host in a similar way as when you get a paper cut. The blood flows from that point. He officially stated this: the possibility of bleeding coming from the outside to the inside is ruled out. Dr. Lazo's analyses are routinely presented in court as he specializes in legal medicine. This eliminates the possibility of fraud due to the lack of technology. Here he says,
si no es una tecnología que nos va a llegar en 50 o en 100 años, que todavía no la tenemos aquí.
Which means it is technology that should be here in 50 to 100 years, but we still do not have it here. He also mentioned that he put an unconsecrated host through the same tests and it disintegrated. Is that amazing or what? Now, skeptics often raise this concern. How can one prove that the tissue analyzed was truly the tissue from the Eucharistic miracle? Here we see the doctor who had the host in his laboratory, found that the tissue was living 3 years after the event, formally claimed the statement above after studying it for 3 months, and DNA testing was inconclusive. This appears supernatural to me. Now let's look at the miracle in Buenos Aires, Argentina. On August 18th, 1996, Father Alejandro Pazet was informed that there was a host sitting in a candlestick on the side of the church. It was dusty, so rather than consuming the host, it was put in a bowl of water to dissolve. 2 weeks later, this appeared. A renowned forensic pathologist, Dr. Frederick Zugby, who was on the History Channel, National Geographic, and taught at Columbia University, analyzed this tissue. Here is what he said.
Heart tissue. You get it from a person getting beat up across the chest.
One hypothesis was that this tissue was from a heart that was beaten across the chest. That is important, as Jesus was severely beaten during his passion. Dr. Zugby performed over 10,000 autopsies in his career, so proposing the cause of death is something he has experience with. While this hypothesis is not definitive, it shows that the heart was suffering. What we see in every Eucharistic miracle that's been medically analyzed is that it is heart tissue. I think it is Jesus showing the world that we all have broken or hardened hearts, and by receiving him, the Eucharistic heart of Jesus, he can heal us. Dr. Zugby wrote his conclusions here and stated that he was not informed of a history of the material. The blood type was not tested due to the small amount of tissues, but DNA testing was performed by forensic analytical, and the results were inconclusive. Going back to Tixla, the blood that was found was type AB. AB blood was also found on the Shroud of Turin. It is interesting how the Eucharistic miracles have type AB blood, and this was found before the Shroud was analyzed. Now, AB blood is the rarest form, with less than 7% of people in the world having this blood type. While this is not a proof of authenticity, it leads me, and I hope you, to believe that this is truly the flesh of Jesus Christ that we have the opportunity to receive at the holy sacrifice of the Mass. I mentioned earlier that in Tixla, they found that it was living tissue. In fact, in one of the slides, a white blood cell was in the process of swallowing fatty material. That's how alive this tissue was. In both Buenos Aires and Tixla, it had been years since the miracle, but there were still living white blood cells under the microscope. White blood cells typically die within minutes, but these were living, showing that the heart tissue was alive. Jesus said, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven, and the bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world." Should we be surprised that his flesh is living? Why else would he say, "I am the living bread"? Finally, we review Lanciano, or Lanciana, which is the most popular Eucharistic miracle. In the 8th century, a priest doubted whether our Lord was truly present in the consecrated host. When he said the words of consecration, "This is my body," during Mass, he saw the host turn into flesh. While this is amazing, what is even more amazing is that the flesh is on display. Over a millennia after the event, the flesh is still present. Last year, I was able to visit with my wife, twin boys, and in-laws. It was a priceless memory. In the 1970s, this was analyzed by Dr. Lanoli, and his article can actually be found on PubMed. The article is in Italian, but my great friends in Rome translated it into English. You can see it at this link. The full article has never before been shown on YouTube in English. His analysis revealed that this was human blood, type AB, and the flesh was heart tissue. He also stated that the blood has ratios of normal fresh blood. How could blood that is over 1,000 years old appear to be fresh? It's a miracle. Now you may wonder, has a reported Eucharistic miracle ever been found to not be miraculous? Yes. In November 2015, there was an alleged miracle in Kearns, Utah. A thorough investigation concluded that the host did not bleed, but the change of appearance in the host was due to a red bread mold known as Neurospora crassa. This was posted on the diocese website and speaks to the rigor of study these miracles undergo. Unfortunately, there are several myths attributed to the miracle at Lanciano. First is that the United Nations analyzed this and performed 500 tests to confirm Dr. Linoli's research. Cardiologist Dr. Franco Serafini visited Lanciano, and the friars there opened the vault containing the UN report.
And we could see this document, this United Nations document.
Wow.
We scheduled a whole afternoon for studying it, but in fact, a couple of minutes was enough.
It did have 500 tests, but they were on Egyptian mummies, not the tissue at Lanciano. It had a small portion related to Lanciano, but this claim has been overstated. The other myth is that at Lanciano there are 5 clots of blood that are all of uneven size, but they weigh the same amount whether weighed together or separately. Supposedly, Dr. Linoli verified this in 1970. He did record the total weight, as you can see here, but the claim that he weighed each one and found them to be the same weight is false. Now, what if this were a forgery? How would you replicate this? Anatomic pathologist Dr. Jason DeGregorio would know how.
One would have to take tissue from a patient who has type AB blood. It would have to come from human heart tissue in a patient who has some sort of inflammatory pathologic process going on in the heart. Preserve that tissue in formalin or formaldehyde so that it would not deteriorate, and then one would have to take that tissue and place it on top of a host. That would be, frankly, as miraculous as the miracle that we're examining here.
Wow, that is amazing. In addition, this would require intense precision and a collaborative international effort, as these findings were not made public until the last decade.
Isn't that guy so sweet and joyful? I think that's awesome. And I wanted you to hear those researchers actually give that testimony. I couldn't find that separate from him. But it's really important we get all the details right, because our friends who are skeptics get, when they hear things that aren't true about these miracles, like the weight of the globules and stuff, then they throw it all out. Because all I could find for people that are saying that Lanciano was a hoax was that the UN studies weren't true and that the globules all don't weigh the same or something. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Jesus transformed the appearance of the Eucharist into the appearance of what it is, his flesh and blood. So that's awesome. I was looking at some research about the state of Catholic belief and what's going on in the world, and only 2 or 3 Catholics out of 10 really believe that the Eucharist is Jesus. And that's really, it's depressing. And propagating the truth and showing that there is actually good evidence that might lead you to examine the faith a little bit more is good for us to know. It also explains, since as Deacon David said this morning, the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. Everything in our faith flows to and from the Eucharist. So it's not a surprise that if most of us, and it is us, it's not some other people, there's times when we all doubt the Eucharist so much. That explains why our lives aren't just effusing joy all the time. It's why all Catholics are contracepting and aborting and divorcing at the same rate as the general population. It's why we sin just as much, even though, as Deacon Dave said, we have an edge because we have the nourishment of Jesus. So in this time, we need to be receiving the Eucharist in a state of grace more than ever, and to be living in the joy that Jesus wants us to have. And he does want us to have it. We're rarely at gunpoint. He's not asking us to suffer all the time, but we do things in love that we wouldn't ordinarily do. And when we are really connected to the Eucharist, that's where that love comes from. Our marriages can be sources of joy, parenting or being single or whatever state in life we're in. It can be made joyful because of the Eucharist. And it just, having this, and I thank you, Mom, so much and Dad and everybody who made today what it is, just a time to be together in public. After this COVID thing, it just feels like we've been crushed down, and that longing for the Eucharist, I think, has risen. Like, when you don't get to go to church or hang out with everybody in public, it really increases that longing. which may be why he allowed it. Maybe it's a good thing. I'm sorry, Gail. You are falling asleep. I just briefly wanted to share this story because I think it's such a perfect metaphor for our time. And I heard this, you may have heard this before, so bear with me. In 1988, in Armenia, there was this young family getting ready for their day, and a father took his little boy to school and said, "Goodbye, son. I love you. I'll be back this afternoon to pick you up." He went to work. It was a normal day, but all of a sudden, a 6.5 magnitude earthquake shattered that town and neighboring towns, and 30,000 people died in less than 4 minutes. And so he ran to the site where his son's school used to be, and he started digging, just getting the bricks, moving stuff. I have a picture of what it looked like, because you got to see, it was horrible, as you can imagine. A couple of other parents from his school, from the boys' school, the boy's name was Armand, by the way, they jumped in and they all started digging for a while. 4 hours go by, no sign of life. The other parents give up. And they say to the man, "Samuel, give up, okay? Go help the living." He doesn't give up. 8 hours, he's digging. 12 hours, 24 hours, no sign of life. The fire chief and some other rescuers come up to him and they're like, "For your own sake, go home, okay? He's dead." He doesn't give up. 36 hours, he is bloody. He's covered in soot from the rubble. And he moves a stone back and he sees two familiar eyes who say back to him, "Dad, I knew you'd come." And he pulled his son out of the rubble. And not only Armand, he pulled 15 other kids out of the rubble. And that's an absolutely true story. And God is always searching for us, and he loves us. And if that rubble is our own sin or our own mess, it does not matter. He is looking for us even when all hope seems to be lost, even when it looks just like a thin wafer. He is searching for us. And amazingly, he allows himself to be found as well when we don't give up. So that story touched me and Rusty when we heard it. And I thought it was a perfect metaphor for these miracles too. So, and I just want to remember that when we receive communion today, in my mind, I'm going to say, "Jesus, I knew you'd come. I knew you'd come." So thank you so much for listening to me. And I love you guys. What? Oh, thanks. Vicky, by the way, got so many souls out of purgatory limping along. Good job.
We want to wait till then? Yeah. Yes, we can. Or do you want to, no, we can do it earlier.
Well,
what are we going to do? Yeah, why don't we take a 15-minute break and then, like we planned, and then start? Let's do that. Yeah. It'll take us a minute to get.